Detective Ratzburg, we were discussing interrogation techniques, do you recall?
Yes, I do.
One technique that you indicated that you sometimes use is lying to a suspect about the evidence against him, right?
True.
You are aware that in some cases that sort of technique of lying to a suspect has produced false confessions, right?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
That is, someone may confess to a crime they didn't commit based on the representations of the police force, right?
Yes.
In Mr. Jensen's case, you had planned to use some of the techniques you'd learned about interrogation, correct?
Yes, with some cautions and all that, yes.
You'd been preparing for this interview for weeks and considering the methods you might use, true?
No, not necessarily. I think there was, you don't know what the person's going to say, so you're not sure on how you're going to approach it or what method you're going to use until you actually get into the interview or the interrogation.
Now, Mr. Jensen had been dependent on you for information about this case, right?
True.
He had been contacting you weekly to try to find out how the investigation was proceeding, right?
Yes.
The information was coming out pretty slowly, is that fair to say?
Yes.
You had tried to establish a friendship with Mr. Jensen, correct?
True.
During your interview with Mr. Jensen, one of the techniques you used was trying to appeal to his friendship, correct?
You could say that, yes.
And sometimes, well, what you're trying to do by doing that is putting the suspect in a position where they feel they might have to say something to appease you, correct?
No, what I try to do is put them in a position to tell the truth.
Well, you're also putting the suspect in a position of feeling like they might have to do something to appease you, correct?
Well, and hopefully that he would tell me the truth.
Well, as to my question, Mr. Ratzburg, by doing that, you're putting the suspect in a position that they have to say something to appease you?
Appeasing me is telling me the truth.
Whatever you think is the truth, right?
Sometimes.
I mean, the suspect learns that he has to say what you want to hear, right?
Not necessarily.
You testified in this case on November 19th, 2002. You recall that?
Yes.
Did you give the following answer, the following question? Well, let me start at, it's page 43. Question. And again, that's an appeal to friendship in an effort to break down his resistance. Answer, yes. An assertion that he owes you something, right? Answer, you can interpret it that way, yes. Question.
Excuse me, counsel, I'm going to sure I got the right transcript. What one are you on?
November 19th, 2002.
Sorry, 10/21/21.
This is what I have, so that's why I didn't give a line.
Also, if there's no line number, November 19th, 2002.
Here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Page 43. Thank you.
Question. And by doing that, you're putting the suspect in a position of feeling like they have to do something to appease you, right? Answer, true. Correct? Is that what your testimony was?
Yes.
Another thing you were engaging in here is persistent questioning, right?
Yes.
You were saying a lot more in this videotape than Mr. Jensen was, right?
It's probably a fair statement.
And by persistently questioning him, you hope to get him to say what you want to hear, right?
Yes.
And what may happen is that the person being interviewed says what you want to hear just to make the persistent questioning stop, right?
That can happen.
You also used some humiliation against Mr. Jensen, correct?
I believe so.
You were goading him, right?
I don't know what you mean by goading them, but
Well, for example, at page 73, line 16 of the recorded interview, and at the top of that, at the end of line 15.
do you have a copy of that for me?
Sure. Providing you with Defendant's Exhibit 142, the recorded interview transcript.
Thank you. What page, answer?
Show page 73.
I just, yes, page 73, line 15. Lines 15 and 16, that's what I'm going to ask you about.
Yes, go ahead.
And in terms of goading Mr. Jensen, you said, be honest with me, be straight with me, Mark, be a man, right?
Yes.
And you're trying to goad him into telling you what you'd been pushing for, right?
Yes.
And you said some rather graphic sexual kinds of things in an effort to provoke him too, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, did you make...
Sexual graphic, there's a whole bunch of that in this case. I'm just not sure where you're at.
Well, you watched that recorded statement yesterday, correct?
Yes, I did.
You used graphic language to describe sexual acts that his wife had been engaging in, right?
I believe so.
Was that an effort to get under his skin?
Well, possibly.
You were engaging in some physical intimidation tactics, right?
Yes.
You're trying to be physically imposing, correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do that most times. I was trying to, it's probably some of my stature, but a lot of people seem to get intimidated just simply by my size. And in Mr. Jensen's case, what I was after was the truth.
Well, you were using physical intimidation, Mr. Ratzburg, right?
Well, I can't say that he was absolutely intimidated, but sometimes I impose on people, yes.
Let me invite your attention to page 39 of the November 19th, 2002 transcript, about 3/4 of the way down the page. Question, you engaged in some intimidation during this interview. Answer, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was at the wrong, what are you talking about now? Okay, what page?
Page 39, November 19th, 2002.
I'm sorry, I thought you were referring to this transcript also. Your question?
Question, you gave the following question, you were asked the following question, you gave the following answer on November 19th, 2002, page 39. Question, you engaged in some intimidation during this interview. Answer, yes.
I think that was just like my answer I just gave. Yes, I'm sure I was. And to get the truth from Mr. Jensen.
Well,
I didn't hear the last thing you said.
And to get the truth from Mr. Jensen.
well, what I'm asking you is about the techniques you used, okay?
Yes,
And you engaged in some intimidation, true?
true.
You did that by tone of voice, right?
Sometimes.
You did that by hand gestures, right?
Well, if you cut off my hands, I probably couldn't talk. So I have a habit of doing my hands while I'm speaking. So,
And-
however,
And that's fine. Were you using some hand gestures in an effort to be somewhat intimidating?
possibly, yes.
You learned in your training that all of these techniques carry with them the danger that you'll produce an unreliable statement, right?
That certainly can happen. sometimes it's a little bit of opinion. You mentioned about influencing the defendant. You don't know if you're influencing him or not. Probably the best way is ask that person to see if he was. But in our training, we certainly are aware of that, and we certainly want to be cautious so that we don't have any false evidence or a confession, let's say, which would just be terrible.
Well,
Some
Mr.
cases.
Ratzburg, what you learn in that case, what you learn in your training is that even well-meaning officers employing these techniques sometimes produce unreliable information because of the techniques, right?
That's possible.
Sometimes people end up saying what the officer wants to hear, right?
Well, are you applying that to this case?
Mr. Ratzburg, well, could I have the question read back?
Sometimes people end up saying what the officer wants to hear, right?
Can that happen? Certainly.
I beg your pardon?
Certainly.
Can that happen, certainly, is that what
Yes.
you said?
Some of these techniques produce nervousness in people, true?
True.
And sometimes nervous people make mistakes in recounting what happened in the past, right?
Yes, and sometimes you pick up as being the interrogator, you can get false signs from people being nervous, and they're just being nervous and possibly not deceitful. So that's something else that's something I've learned over time, and that's something you got to be careful of also.
Okay. Can your techniques produce nervousness, Mr. Ratzburg?
Generally, they do.
And nervousness can produce mistakes, right?
Yes, they can.
And no matter how much training you have, you're not a human lie detector, are you?
No, I'm not.
You can't absolutely determine whether people are telling you the truth or not, right?
Right.
Is it Exhibit 142, is that what you have in front of you, the recorded statement transcript?
Yes, I do.
Let me first invite your attention to page 12.
I'm sorry, what?
Page 12 of the recorded statement. And let me go to line 21.
Yes.
Mr. Jensen told you regarding Julie that she had 3 years of nursing. She dropped out of nursing school in her 3rd year, and that she still has all of her old medical texts and everything in the house, correct? Did Mr. Jensen tell you that during this interview?
Yes, you're not complete, though, is my hesitation.
Well, he says they're all boxed up in the basement.
Thank you. Yes.
Turning to page 14. I guess the very top of the page, line 2, Mr. Jensen told you that he had gone to see Dr. Borman, correct?
Yes.
You went and saw Dr. Borman perhaps a month later, correct?
Correct.
You did not go to talk to Dr. Borman right away regarding Julie Jensen's medical condition?
What do you mean by right away?
I mean less than a month.
Correct.
Turning to page 17. Between lines 7 and 17. And to summarize, Mr. Jensen was telling you that he was concerned that there may have been some sort of bad reaction to the Paxil or to the combination of the Paxil and the Ambien. Is that right?
Yes.
And then he discussed the printout that they had obtained from the computer from looking up Paxil on the early morning of December 2nd, correct?
Thought it might have been the early morning of December 3rd.
Well,
However, December 2nd or 3rd.
turning to page 23. Okay, let me have you turn to page 24, line 7. Mr. Jensen told you that he was trying to get Julie to see Borman because there was something going on with her that you couldn't, she had no enjoyment of life at all. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please turn to page 33, Mr. Ratzburg. Beginning at line 19, you told Mr. Jensen that the state crime lab had determined that his handwriting was on some photographs that had been found, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Jensen told you that he didn't recall, initially Mr. Jensen told you on page 34, line 21, that he didn't recall ever doing that, right?
Yes.
In fact, the crime lab had determined that it was probably not Mr. Jensen's writing on the sample that was submitted, true?
Yes.
That's what we looked at earlier today, right?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. That's the only document that I believe they're referencing was a postcard. There's no indication that there was ever any, that anybody from the state crime lab looked at the photographs, any photographs with the writing on it, handwriting on it. My understanding was it was a postcard.
Well, Detective Ratzburg, the postcard they determined was probably not Mark Jensen, right?
I beg pardon?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say your question again?
Yes. The state crime laboratory determined that the writer of the postcard was probably not Mark Jensen, true?
True.
Were any photographs submitted to the state crime lab?
I don't believe so, no.
And oftentimes throughout this interview, Detective Ratzburg, you just kept talking and talking and not letting Mark Jensen say anything. Would that be fair to say?
Sometimes, yes.
You were making many accusations, but not giving him an opportunity to respond to each individual accusation that you were making, correct?
True.
And among the accusations you were making were false statements, correct?
Yes.
For instance, the false statement regarding the writing on the photographs, correct? Being identified as Mr. Jensen's,
True.
right? And you also told them that there was some superimposed photographs among the evidence that was submitted to the crime lab, right? That they had determined that they were superimposed images, correct?
I don't exactly recall that, but I think that's probably accurate, the exact wording.
Well, let me invite your attention to page 43, line 11. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
And it said, and your question, in part of a long question, you say, and the pictures appear to be at the crime lab like they were somehow, and this is over my head too a little bit, is superimposed on there, right?
Yes.
And that wasn't true, correct?
No, that was not true.
And at page 40, after you explained to Mr. Jensen what the crime lab had found, and let me just direct your attention to lines 10 to 14. You say, question, the crime lab is wrong, is what you're saying to me? Answer, in terms of me doing all the photos? Yes. Question, yes what? Answer, yeah. I mean that they're wrong that I was leaving the photos out there. Question at line 15, it wasn't you? Answer, it wasn't me. I might have, and I don't recall this, but the only way, if there was writing on there, maybe I embellished them at one point. Correct?
Yes.
And what Mr. Jensen initially was telling you is that he didn't recall writing on there at all. Correct?
Yes.
And you kept telling him that the crime lab had found his handwriting on there. True?
True. Yes.
These were events that had occurred a couple years earlier. True?
Yes.
The last photographs that had been given to your department was a couple years earlier, right?
I believe so.
And Mr. Jensen, after being told the number of times that the crime lab had identified his handwriting, said, well, maybe I did write on there, right?
Yes.
But he didn't recall any specific writing that he had ever done. True?
True.
And that might have been the kind of thing that is writing on a photograph that would seem so inconsequential that he thought, well, maybe I did that and don't remember it, right?
You know, you're asking me to speculate on what he was thinking, and I just don't know that. But, could that have happened? Sure. I'm not sure on your question, if you mean,
That's
you know
fine.
what I'm saying?
I think you've answered it.
Okay.
You never asked Mr. Jensen to identify anything he specifically wrote, right? On any photograph, true?
Say that question again?
Yeah. I mean, you didn't confront Mr. Jensen by saying, did you write X on a photograph?
I did not, no.
So he never had a chance to address specifically whether he wrote some particular phrase on any photograph, true?
Yes.
At page 44, line 17, Mr. Jensen, beginning at, well, let me start with line 15. Question, you would get a photograph in the mail with her in it, showing her with a man's penis? Answer, yeah, and that was the stuff, it was very early on. I got that in the mail, I mean at the office. Question, okay. Answer, in the mail, okay. And I remember one of the girls, this goes way, way back, question, yeah, coming in with an envelope full of pictures, my secretary going, you know, don't even want to know what that's all about. Correct?
Yes.
And he was telling you that the time he received photographs in the mail was a long time ago at work, right?
Yes.
Not any time recently. True?
Yes.
And that's consistent with Julie Jensen's log, true?
True.
At no time did Mr. Jensen ever say that he created any of these photos, right?
Correct.
At no time did he ever say he purchased them or that he was the initial source of the photographs, correct?
Correct.
He told you that his wife was very upset by the photographs, right?
Correct.
So that he was reluctant at times to tell her that he had received the photographs, correct?
Yes.
And that ultimately, after more photographs would show, or there was some commotion in the house, he might say, here are the things that I have found in the past, right?
True. Yes.
And that was consistent with, do you recall Officer Cosman's report from August of 1995, where that photo that was found in the truck, that Mr. Jensen turned over a photo he had found a month and a half earlier. You recall that? It's probably not a very good question. Let me see if I can find the exhibit. Do you have that photograph
I
there?
think that might be here. The photograph,
That's part of what I'm going to look for. Incident reports. Let me show you Defendant's Exhibit 199. Is this in evidence?
Can I see it?
Yeah. I move Defendant's Exhibit 199, which is a series of incident reports from the Pleasant Prairie Police Department at the Jensen home.
The objection
No, Your Honor.
received.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 199. I ask you to review Officer Cosman's report from August 24th, 1995, which is on bait stamp number 1550 of that exhibit.
okay.
What is reported in Officer Cosman's report is that in around August 24th, 1995, there were some photographs found in, is it the shed or the boat at the Jensen home?
It's the boat.
So Officer Cosman responded to that complaint about photographs being found in the boat. Is that right?
Correct.
At that time, the Jensens also produced a photograph that was found on July 3rd, 1995, correct?
Yes, they did.
That's the photograph that is marked as, that you have in front of you. Could you give me that number?
BS Exhibit S 197.
Mr. and Mrs. Jensen produced S-197 at the same time as they produced the photographs found a month and a half later, correct?
Yes,
Suggesting that the photographs had accumulated and whatever they had was turned over to Officer Cosman in late August of 95, correct?
correct.
You are aware from the log we went through that there was another occasion in which a bag of evidence was turned over to Officer Cosman, true?
Yes,
Again, indicating that Mr. and Mrs. Jensen would accumulate evidence and then turn it over to your department, true?
well, from the report, it just indicates Julie Jensen, but I'm sure it was a joint effort.
And at page 53 of the recorded statement, at lines 2 and 3, your question was, so you misled her, meaning Julie, which in turn misled the police. Answer, the police, yes. I mean, it was not a malicious standpoint, it was. And that's in regard to turning over pictures and the timing of which they were received, true?
No, I believe that misled the police part. I recall a couple questions about the police. One is where I asked him, he needed to report some of the stuff that he found so we could have stayed on top of it better. And in this one here, you misled her, which in turn you misled the police. The police, yes, I mean, it was not malice standpoint, it was. You were pissed off at her, and then it goes on from there.
But that was regarding the accumulation of photographs, if you look at page 52, correct? Beginning at line 52, beginning at line 9 through 12.
Yes?
So when the question about misleading, that was misleading about the accumulation of pictures, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Jensen admitted to misleading the police regarding the accumulation of pictures when, as we see from Officer Cosman's report, he wasn't misleading police about pictures being accumulated.
Objection, counsel, arguing with the witness. Just document speaks for itself.
Well, Judge, speaking objections, I have a motion.
I already sustained it. I was covering my mouth, so maybe you didn't hear it. But
In fact, the Jensens were letting the police know that photographs had accumulated, correct?
Objection, again, Your Honor, the document speaks for itself, and this witness can interpret no better than the jury.
Well, from your review of the file, there are instances in which evidence is accumulated by the Jensens and then turned over to the police, right?
Yes.
In fact, at page 45, line 10, Detective, Mr. Jensen says, at one point, I remember there was a whole garbage bag of stuff that had been accumulated. She had found stuff around the house too, correct?
Sorry, I was reading page 53. I have some question about that, but you were speaking now, which page?
Page 45, line 10.
And what was your question, sir?
Mr. Jensen told you that at one point, I remember there was a whole garbage bag of stuff that had been accumulated. She had found stuff around the house too, correct?
Yes.
And repeatedly, Mr. Jensen says that he did not make them regarding the photos, he only received them. True?
Yes.
When you interviewed Dave Nearing, well, you interviewed Dave Nearing after Mr. Jensen's arrest, true?
Yes.
When you met with him, you told him that Mark Jensen had made the photographs, right?
I asked him if he knew anything about the photographs and what was going on, and whether their offices were upstairs and they could see right out into the parking lot. I questioned him about that. And I may have told him that I suspected Mark possibly made the photographs. And then he went on to some other indications also.
Well, we talked earlier about the risk of contaminating witness statements by having the witness be biased, right?
Did we talk about it earlier? Yes, we did.
And one thing that may bias a witness is by telling the witness a false statement about the defendant, right?
It could, sure.
And you suggested to Mr. Nearing that Mark Jensen had made the photos, right? Or admitted making the photos even, is what you told him,
When I was
right?
speaking with Mr. Nearing, I was questioning him about what he knew about the photos, about Mark Jensen's capability of making them, and if he was aware of anything on computers or at the office, or was he aware of anything coming to the office? So, I mean, that's part of a whole line of questioning, given the whole picture. I also further asked him if he was aware of people leaving stuff on his vehicle and the mail at the office and so forth.
All right, here's my question though. You hand wrote a statement for Mr. Nearing, right?
Yes, yes.
And in that statement, you wrote, Mark never told me that he made the photos, right?
It's probably true, yes.
And the reason he wrote that is because you told him that Mark had made the photos.
I'd have to see that statement to refresh my memory better, sir. What are you talking about? And what was your question again?
You told Mr. Nearing that Mark Jensen made the photos that were left around the house, right?
Objection. How is this relevant, Your Honor, as to what this detective allegedly told Mr. Nearing? It's irrelevant.
Because it goes to Mr. Nearing's bias when he made statements in the future against Mr. Jensen.
Objection. Mr. Nearing has never indicated in this
The
statement.
objection's overruled.
You told Mr. Nearing that Mark Jensen made those photos, right?
A very long conversation, and I believe that would be something that I covered with him in the contents of, does he have any information that Mark was capable or was making them?
And in telling Mr. Nearing that he made the photos, you run the risk of him having a bias against Mr. Jensen, correct?
Object to the
Overruled.
question, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Well, Your Honor, it's-
Overruled.
That's possible.
And in terms of your goading Mr. Jensen, I invite your attention to page 62, beginning at line line 1. Actually, I'm going to go to line 2. Are you there?
Yes,
And it says he made a comment, and he refers to Ron Cosman, correct?
yes.
He, Ron Cosman, made a comment that was, I mean, I'm sure he didn't mean it that way, but it was like your wife has told me about all the guys she's been with. And that was not a conversation I want to have, you know. Was the purpose of making that statement just to get under Mr. Jensen's skin by talking about how many guys his wife had been with?
Okay, the way I have this, that's Mr. Jensen's response. I have, maybe let me open this up.
You might be right. My apologies.
Your Honor, yes.
That's my
This is the defendant speaking.
that's my mistake. Mr. Jensen's telling you what Ron Cosman had told him
Yes,
about Mrs. Jensen.
yes.
My apologies. Mr. Jensen adamantly denied that he had done anything to suffocate his wife, correct?
Yes.
You told him on several occasions that you thought it was an accident, right?
Yes.
That was an effort by you just to get him to adopt some version of events that would have him accepting some responsibility?
Well, that was clearly my intent. If he did in fact say something, I wanted to make it easier for him to tell me the truth. And one tactic, as we've pointed out, you've pointed out several, there's several others on the other side too, and one of those tactics is to make it easier for them to talk to you and to tell the truth. And so, as we spoke, I mentioned the word accident probably several times in that interview, and then maybe Mr. Jensen would come on board, say, yes, it was an accident, and then it would be easier to talk with or talk about from there.
That's also why you mentioned this concept of a autoerotic or sexual play kind of death too, right?
Yeah, that would go down the same lines, yes.
Despite all those techniques, Mr. Jensen never said he had anything to do with the death of his wife, right?
Say that question one more time.
You used all those interrogation techniques, and throughout your interview, Mr. Jensen denied having any responsibility for causing his wife's death.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for a hearsay response.
In that recorded statement we watched yesterday, you were employing all these techniques, correct?
Yes.
A number of techniques?
Yes, yes.
And despite all those techniques, Mr. Jensen never told you that he played a role in causing his wife's death, right?
Yes,
You agree?
yes.
You recall being asked some questions yesterday about the letter that Julie Jensen had wrote that you received from Ted Voigt?
Yes,
And Mr. Jamboys asked you if Mr. Jensen explained why she wrote those things, right? Do you recall that?
I do, but repeat that question one more time.
Did Mr. Jamboys ask you, or do you recall Mr. Jamboys asking you whether Mr. Jensen explained why his wife wrote those things?
Yes,
If we turn to page 83, you recall that you left the interview room and left the letter with Mr. Jensen, correct?
yes,
He had not seen that letter before, true?
true.
The video recorded Mr. Jensen silently reading the letter, correct?
Yes,
He can be seen shaking his head softly back and forth in a no fashion, right?
yes,
You come back with some coffee for him, right?
yes,
You ask the question, line 8, page 83, question, why would she write a letter like that? That's her handwriting, right? I don't want to answer, yeah, I mean, it sure looks like it. We had, you interrupt, question, why don't we too? What I wanted to ask you to was, he starts answering on line 12, for a week or two prior to her going to see Borman, you say, He says, things were absolutely crazy. I mean, you know, and there's 3 people in the office that will tell you if you ask them that I was in the office through September, October, November on a daily basis, upset and worried about what was going on with her. She was off the wall. I mean, you'd come home and find her in a fetal position in the bed or the couch. She was, question, fetal position mean like balled up like that? Answer, curled up like that. Question, okay. Answer, I mean, this was all stuff, you know, if you want to really get into Question, Mark, you've got to be truthful with me here now. Answer, I'm trying. Question, he continues. Answer, she's getting abusive with the kids. David had and the transcript says unintelligible. Do you recall him saying ticks? Did you hear that on the tape or no?
I'm familiar with that, however, with the tick issue.
Okay, well, it's not there now. She was running them all over to docs with that kind of stuff. Question, Answer, everyone around the house was walking on eggs. Got to be a joke in the office that I was going to have to. I'd come in so visibly upset in the morning that people would ask me what was wrong. Answer, and I don't know why she comes off this way because, and then you interrupt and say, well, she's obviously suspicious that something's going to happen. I mean, here's your notebook. I mean, these are pictures of that. Now, this is all your handwriting, and what she's describing in here is accurate, right? I mean, what's the part about the syringe? What's that got to do with anything? You make the note of the syringe in there, like she mentions in her letter, which is in here. Answer, that was in the lower portion. In the bedroom, there's a wet bar, dry bar. There was a razor blade in there. There was aspirin. I was seriously concerned that she was going to do something to herself. And when he's talking about razor blade and aspirin, he's talking about things were on that Post-it note that she had photographed, correct?
Yes.
And then you ask the question, okay, and now we're on top of page 85. Well, explain these notes that she's talking about in here. I got this for you. Answer, okay. Question, explain this for me. There's some different notes in there, and I kind of tried to get them in order. What's all that mean? Answer, the crying when I got home, new game. I can't read my writing. Are those all about Julie or what? Answer, yes. And those refer to those calendar entries that we looked at a little earlier this afternoon, true?
Yes.
And he continues to explain what's in the notes, moving down to line 23. He says, right, Doug's diaper conference. She had a conference at GTI. She was going to try and go back to school. And you say, she was out looking for a job too, wasn't she? Answer, we were having conversations about what was going to happen when Doug went back to preschool. Question, Answer, and it was like her life was ending. She was totally upset. She went to GTI, she had met with the counselors there. She came back and if I remember, she had very little to do to finish a 2-year degree there. Question, for nursing? Answer, for some type of medical thing. Question, Answer, but she wasn't happy with that. I mean, that was on the 23rd. Those are the questions and answers that were given?
Yes.
And although you started out asking about the letter, you moved on pretty quickly and started asking Mr. Jensen about what was in the pictures and to explain that, correct?
Yes.
And he was answering your questions about what was in the photographs.
Yes.
Correct? And then you return to the letter at page 87, line 11, with your question. Right, she found that to be suspicious in your thing, meaning the day planner, and that they're not true. Question, I don't know what it means, and this is reading from the letter. I don't know what it means, but if anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. Our relationship is deteriorated to the polite superficial. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. Mark lives and works for the kids. He's an avid surfer of the net. Then I find all this stuff. Now you're away from the letter. You say, then I find all this stuff on here too. Now what I don't want to have happen here, Mark, is I don't want to go through this stuff, and I can. It's all in the internet file, that this poisoning information here. Answer, And then you go on for the next page, you start talking about some computer information, correct? And about antifreeze being on the computer. That's at page 87 and then 88.
Yes.
And again, you move on from the letter at that point and don't go back to asking any questions about the letter, true?
Yes.
So he never finished explaining his thoughts about the letter and what Julie's condition was that might have prompted her to write such a letter, correct?
You might say that. I mean, he certainly could have spoke with me further.
But you kept talking and interrupting him when he was starting to answer, fair to say?
Sometimes, yes, fair to say.
And generally speaking, when he was asked to respond to the letter, what he did was he responded by telling you that he was concerned about his wife's mental health shortly before her death, right?
Yes.
Let me invite your attention, Detective Ratzburg, to page 122.
Yes.
And going to page 122, line 22. And there, Mr. Jensen tells you about the bottles of aspirin that she had, correct?
Yes.
And at line 23, he says, I remember going onto the internet looking for things on aspirin overdoses. This was after she got sick and puked on the carpet. Going to the top of page 123, question, that was when you were in St. Louis. Answer, right. Yeah, this is after I had gotten back. I remember showing it, yeah. Question, so some of this stuff, meaning computer stuff, may be yours. Answer, some of it may be mine. Correct?
Yes.
And that was what Mr. Jensen was expressing to you there was his concern about his wife taking too much aspirin.
Objection, Your Honor. The document speaks for itself.
Sustained.
Well, based on your conversations with Mr. Jensen, that was your understanding between he and you that he believed that his wife was abusing aspirin, true?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, this.
You were aware from that daytimer we went through that there's some mention of aspirin in there, correct?
Yes.
And he had told you here that his wife had gotten sick when he was in St. Louis, right?
Again, objection. The document speaks for itself, Your Honor.
And late in that videotape, another officer comes in by the name of Heather Berg, is that right?
Yes.
She had been watching the entire interview, true?
Yes.
She had been helping to videotape it, correct?
Yes.
You had planned with her beforehand how some of this interview would take place, correct?
To some degree, yes.
One of the things you had discussed was to have her come in the middle of the interview and ask Mr. Jensen some questions, correct?
Well, it depends on how to interview. I'm sure we talked about that if we wanted to do that, something we may elect to do. It's kind of like when you do an interview, you get just a toolbox and you decide which tool to take out and you don't know what you're going to fix until you ask the questions and get the answers. So a lot of it is kind of spur of the moment.
That would be something of what you've been taught is a kind of a Mutt and Jeff routine, correct?
Well, there's all kinds of comments. Mutt and Jeff, good cop, bad cop, the list goes on. Good guy, bad guy type thing.
I thought Mutt and Jeff was good guy, bad guy.
Well, it is, but there's some different variations of Mutt and Jeff and good cop and bad cop, so I'm sure you get the little funnies as well as I do, so.
You've reviewed this entire transcript, correct? Right? Not just
April
1 to 140?
21st, The April 21st transcript?
Yes.
I don't know what you're holding.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Very good. Yes,
162, is that right?
yes, 142.
142.
It's getting late.
And throughout that transcript, there's discussion in which you're talking about petechiae of the lungs.
Objection, Your Honor, to any discussion of this transcript beyond page 142. I have no objection to discussions of 0 to 142, but beyond that, it's hearsay.
Well, you have to carefully tailor your question. Because the
Okay.
the validity, the general thrust of the objection is valid.
All right, well, I'll do that a little more carefully. I guess I'll come back to that. You also, do you have Julie Jensen's day timer in front of you?
I don't believe so.
No?
I believe it's over there.
Is this it?
Yes.
Let me show you Exhibit 239, Detective. Maybe pull out that day timer.
I'm sorry.
If you just pull that out and just open that to the front page for me, I think it's all right, of the day timer itself.
Right here.
Next page. Okay. And in the first page there of the day timer, Julie Jensen has written down, and it's on the screen there, Scott McCaig and Kelly Labonte, right?
Yes.
Mrs. Jensen apparently has some awareness of Kelly Labonte.
Apparently.
We don't know when she wrote this information in the book,
We do not.
just sometime prior to December 3rd, right?
Likely, yes.
Turning to March 18th.
Yes.
And we have some entry for TurboTax, correct?
Yes.
And in that recorded statement we watched yesterday, Mr. Jensen advised you that Julie did Quicken on the computer? You recall that?
I do and I don't. I'm not sure where I recall it.
Okay. I'm sorry, the day timer is what exhibit?
Day timer is S239.
I moved S239 into evidence. I don't.
Objection.
Did you say objection?
I said no objection.
It will be received.
If you could turn to page 11 of 142.
Of which document, sir?
Probably, given the hour.
Why don't I just add, this just closes up the Quicken thing I just asked him about.
I'll make it
So,
quick.
Yeah.
Which document are you referring to, the transcript?
Oh, I thought you had it open. That's fine.
I can find it quickly.
All right.
Let's move.
Page
get it
11.
over with. Let's get it over with.
Page 11?
Page 11, line 10. And Mr. Jensen there talking about the computer says it had the Quicken program on there, which is like a financial program. Question, Answer, she put all the information in there on that. I mean, entered it all. Correct?
Yes.
And do you know whether TurboTax is something that can be used with the Quicken program?
That I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, I don't know about you, but I heard about as much as I want to out of lawyers for a week, and I think we need a couple of days off. So let's do that, and we'll return at 8:55 on Monday, and it's, again, imperative that you not to speak with anyone about the case at all, and that you not permit anyone else to speak to you about it, and that you not read, watch, or listen to any media account or go on the internet or anything connected with the case. And we're moving along, as I indicated most recently, and so I'm hopeful that we'll conclude well within the period that we originally outlined. Any questions? Enjoy the weekend. How many you think now that the Packers are out of it, I've even forgotten who's in it.
The Giants.
The Giants? How many think the Giants will win? And how about the Bostons? The New Englands? All right. About an even split. All right. Well, enjoy the game if you're interested in football, and otherwise enjoy the weekend.
The Patriots.